It started with a simple trip to a small rural town in the Pacific Northwest. Daniel had always been drawn to places untouched by modern life, where nature dominated and the pace was slow, almost timeless. He had heard whispers from locals about an old, abandoned lodge hidden deep within the forest, a place that no one visited, yet everyone seemed to know about. Stories told of strange lights, disembodied laughter, and the occasional disappearance of hikers who ventured too close. Daniel, a true believer in the unexplained, decided to see it for himself. Arriving in the town as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel felt an immediate sense of unease. The streets were nearly empty, and a fog rolled in from the nearby mountains, wrapping the town in a cold, damp blanket. He stopped at a small diner to ask for directions to the lodge. The waitress, a woman with a wary expression, hesitated before speaking. "You don't want to go there," she said quietly. "People, they don't come back the same." Daniel smiled nervously, trying to laugh off the warning. He had heard enough stories to know that fear often amplified the strange, and he was determined not to let superstition dictate his curiosity. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook, Daniel set out into the forest. The trees grew dense quickly, and the path became less clear with every step. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves, a pungent reminder of the forest's age and isolation. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to come alive with whispers, soft, fleeting sounds that might have been wind or might have been something else entirely. Daniel pressed on, his flashlight cutting through the thick undergrowth, until finally he saw it, the lodge looming through the mist like a relic from another time. The building was massive, its wooden exterior warped and rotting, windows darkened with grime. Strange symbols had been etched into the doorframe, and an overpowering sense of neglect and something more sinister radiated from it. Daniel's heart raced with a mix of fear and excitement. He stepped closer, noticing the faint outline of footprints in the mud, leading straight to the entrance. Whoever had been here before him had arrived recently. As he reached for the door handle, a sudden gust of icy wind swept through the clearing, causing the trees to groan and the old lodge to seem to shudder. Daniel hesitated. Something about the air felt alive. He knew he was not alone. And then he heard it, a faint, melodic humming, coming from inside, almost calling his name. Every instinct screaming at him to turn back, Daniel pushed the door open. The hinges screamed in protest, echoing through the silent forest. The lodge was a labyrinth of shadowed hallways, peeling wallpaper and furniture coated in decades of dust. The humming grew louder, guiding him deeper into the darkness. And Daniel realized that whatever was waiting inside had been expecting him. Daniel stepped cautiously through the dim hallway, the beam of his flashlight cutting through layers of dust and cobwebs. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, carrying a faint scent of damp wood and something else he couldn't identify, something metallic like old blood. Each creak of the floorboards echoed unnaturally, bouncing off the walls as if the lodge itself was listening. Shadows danced across the peeling wallpaper, and Daniel sometimes thought he saw movement in the corners of his eyes, flickers of shapes that vanished the instant he looked directly at them. Following the persistent humming, he found himself in a grand parlor. Moonlight filtered through shattered windows, revealing a massive fireplace, cold and empty, yet strangely blackened, as if a fire had burned there recently. The humming grew louder here, resonating through the walls and into his chest, making it difficult to think. On the floor, Daniel noticed a pattern of objects arranged in a circle. Old photographs, candles long since melted into the wipe, and small trinkets, charms, amulets, and what appeared to be fragments of bones. His pulse quickened. This was no ordinary abandoned lodge. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the room, vanishing behind a tattered curtain. Daniel froze, trying to convince himself it was just his imagination. But then, the temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the cold air. The humming became a voice, soft and sorrowful, whispering his name. Daniel. Daniel. He swallowed hard and called out, "Who's there?" There was no answer, only the echoes of his own voice. The feeling of being watched intensified, as though dozens of unseen eyes were fixated on him from every corner of the room. Driven by a mix of fear and obsession, Daniel stepped into the center of the circle on the floor. The moment he did, the room seemed to shift. Shadows stretched unnaturally, creeping along the walls and ceiling. The candles flickered, casting strange, elongated shapes. Daniel's flashlight flickered, then went out, leaving him in near total darkness. Panic surged, but he could still hear the humming, now a haunting melody, interwoven with whispers. Fragments of conversations from decades past. Faces appeared in the darkness, fleeting, ghostly edges of people long gone, their expressions frozen in terror or sorrow. They seemed trapped, bound to this place, and now they were aware of him. A sudden, sharp noise, like the snapping of wood, made Daniel jump. He realized he was standing on something unstable, a hidden trapdoor beneath the floorboards. The whispers became frantic, almost pleading, and Daniel felt a force, invisible yet palpable, urging him to step back. But curiosity, and perhaps a fatal sense of bravado, pushed him forward. His foot caught on the edge of the trapdoor, and with a loud crack, it gave way beneath him. He tumbled down a narrow, dark stairwell into a hidden basement below. The humming, exploding. Daniel landed hard on the cold stone floor of the basement, the impact sending a jolt of pain up his spine. He groaned, struggling to regain his bearings in the oppressive darkness. His flashlight, somehow still in his hand, flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. The space was cramped, filled with crates and old furniture covered in dust and mold. But what caught his attention was a doorway at the far end of the basement, its frame crooked and warped as though it had been forced open many times. As he approached, the whispers intensified, forming words that made him shiver. Leave, or join us. The temperature plunged even further, his breath forming mist in the air, and Daniel felt an icy touch brush against his arm. He spun around, but nothing was there, only shadows that seemed to shift and twist with a life of their own. Heart racing, he turned back to the doorway, compelled by an unexplainable force. Inside the next room, he found remnants of rituals, an altar built from stone and wood, littered with candles, small bones, and scraps of parchment covered in strange symbols. The air was thick with the scent of incense and decay. He could see marks on the walls, scratches deep and jagged, as if something had clawed at the surface in a desperate struggle. And then he noticed the floor, a series of concentric circles etched into the stone, each filled with more symbols, some glowing faintly, as if reacting to his presence. Daniel's pulse pounded as he stepped closer. He felt a presence behind him, and without turning, he whispered, "Who's there?" The shadows coalesced, forming vague human shapes, faces contorted with anger and sorrow. They reached for him, their hands stretching impossibly long. Panic surged, and he stumbled backward, nearly falling into one of the ritual circles. The glowing symbols pulsed, and a cold wind whipped through the basement, carrying voices, some pleading, some mocking, desperate to escape. Daniel scrambled toward a small stairway leading further down. Each step creaked ominously, threatening to collapse. The shadows followed, whispering his name, their voices now louder, more insistent, and more menacing. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes on him, the oppressive force of the spirits drawing closer. Every instinct screamed at him to run, yet a morbid curiosity kept him moving forward, deeper into the heart of the lodge's dark secret. Daniel finally reached the bottom of the stairway, emerging into a cavernous underground chamber. The walls were slick with moisture, and the air smelled of rot and old earth. In the center of the room stood a massive stone statue, its features twisted into a grotesque amalgamation of human and beast, eyes hollow but somehow watching. Around it, the shadows had formed a ring, moving with deliberate coordination, their whispers now a deafening roar. He stumbled backward, tripping over scattered bones, and the statue's eyes seemed to flare with a malevolent glow. A voice, deep and guttural, reverberated through the chamber. "You should not have come here." Daniel's skin crawled as the shadows surged, forming tendrils that reached out, wrapping around his limbs, pulling him toward the altar. He fought, thrashing and kicking, but the more he resisted, the tighter their grip became. In a last desperate act, he grabbed a nearby candle, plunging it into one of the glowing ritual circles. The symbols flared violently, blinding him with light. The shadows screamed, a sound unlike any human cry, and recoiled, retreating into the corners of the chamber. Daniel fell to the ground, panting. The oppressive presence momentarily lifted. The statue remained, silent and unmoving, but the air was tense, as if it were merely waiting. Gathering every ounce of courage, Daniel scrambled back up the stairway, the shadows whispering behind him, but not following. He burst into the lodge, gasping for fresh air, the sun breaking through the trees like a promise of safety. He stumbled outside, vowing never to return. Even as he left, he could feel eyes watching from the darkened windows, and he knew the lodge held more secrets than anyone could imagine. For days afterward, Daniel heard whispers in his dreams, glimpses of shadowy figures lingering at the edge of his vision, reminding him that some places and some spirits never truly let go. He had escaped the lodge, but the lodge had not released him entirely, and deep down, he understood that curiosity had drawn him into a world he could never fully leave behind.